מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אכסר, בן הודש ירביצני, הלמי מנוחות יענו עליני. נפשי ישובב יערכני במגלי צדק למען שמו, קם כי ילק וגיצה למוות, לא ידע רע כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינקמוני, תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דישנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
The cantor began with the chanting of the 23rd Psalm. Those of you who are of a certain age and got schooled in North America, remember that we used to begin each day with the recitation of the 23rd Psalm. So I'd like you to, if you wish, to read with me. I'll read the kind of standard, somewhat outdated version, but it's one that's probably close to all our hearts. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There are many images in this psalm. The one, of course, that immediately comes to mind is the image of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. For me, however, the image that always pops out is the image of God, the Lord, as the shepherd. It presents for us, I think, a model of what it is that we are supposed to do at such a time. In Hebrew and in Yiddish, we refer to a funeral as levaya, levaya. It comes from a Hebrew root that means to escort, to walk with somebody. Strangely, it's used twice or used in two different ways in the Talmud. There is the levaya, the walking, the escorting of the deceased. And on the other hand, there is the walking as the bride and the groom go under the chuppah as they prepare to marry. In each case, we're present to escort these people as they make another transition in their existence. In this case, we are here as shepherds to shepherd a soul, as Erwin makes his journey from this realm of existence to what in Hebrew is called Olam Haba, the world that is coming. We are here also to shepherd the mourners. Judy, Paul, Anne, and in fact, probably all of us in a sense. And so, at the conclusion of this service, we will leave here. We will escort the body, the person, the memories, the heritage, the traditions from here to the Shaarey Zedek Cemetery. And then afterwards, we'll gather for the meal of condolence at the family home. During the week, the family will be attending services here at Shaarey Zedek. So this is, as I said earlier, is a time of transition. And transitions are difficult. It means that we're moving from one level of existence to another. For children, the passing of a parent becomes a significant transition, because those of us who have lost our parents know that somehow we enter into a new level of responsibility. We gain a new perspective on the finitude of life, and hopefully gain a better sense of what our values and goals and perspectives are. We will share some memories, some of them sad, but not all sad, both here and during the Shiva. Sometimes when people gather for Shiva, it's a little difficult to know what to say. Actually, the tradition is that when you come to a Shiva house, you're not supposed to speak. You're supposed to wait for the person who you've come to bring condolences to actually address you. I learned this lesson many, many years ago when the father of a close friend died. And the father, was a well-known Hasidic rabbi. And I went to the house of Shiva. And the mourners, I just walked in all anxious, wondering, what am I going to say? And I sat down, and nobody said anything. We all waited on the mourners. And the strange thing is that at the end, no one spoke. And yet there was a very profound sense of comfort, because somehow we connected without words. So Shiva is a time to shepherd the mourners, to bring them comfort in ways that are appropriate to them.
I don't know if this is on yet. Can you hear me? I'm Ann Weiszmann, Erwin's kids. My father was born on September 14th, 1923, in Budapest, Hungary. You can't hear me? Okay. My father was born on September 14th, 1923, in Budapest, Hungary, to Jenő and Elizabeth Weiszmann. He had a younger sister, Katalin. He had a very large, extended family in rural Hungary. My grandfather, Jenő, was an insurance broker who trained my dad to have a strong work ethic while being both ambitious, charitable, and honest. Following grade 4, my dad got a full scholarship to a private school sponsored by the Italian government. At this school, my dad learned German, Italian, Hungarian, and Latin. It would come as no surprise to anyone who knew my dad that he graduated from high school summa cum laude. Following high school, my dad applied to the Joseph Nader Technical University of Budapest. As a Jew, because of the numerous clauses policy of the Hungarian government of the day, his application was flatly rejected. My dad was not one to be easily discouraged. Following the rejection of his application to the university, he enrolled to become an apprentice fine mechanic. In 1943, he became a journeyman fine mechanic. Little did he know that this training would later save his life during the Holocaust. He got work at a Hungarian munitions factory. When the control of this factory was taken over by the Germans, he was kept on as a useful Jew. That is, someone who could be used for the German war effort. This employment may have kept him from being deported, as were so many young Jewish men. By the fall of 1944, Budapest was taken over by the Hungarian Arrow Cross, that is, the Hungarian version of the Nazi Party. My dad, along with several hundred others, was rounded up by the Arrow Cross thugs in order to be deported. The men were told to stand in two groups, one for those with Swedish protective passes and the other for those who did not have papers. My dad had no such protective papers. A friend from high school who was already standing in the Swedish group signaled to my dad to cross over. My brave and optimistic father took his chances and ran over to join them. An Arrow Cross officer saw that someone had moved between the groups and threatened all of the men in the protected group with deportation if they did not give up the interloper among them. No one came forward to expose my father. Their decency definitely saved his life. Eventually, my dad was able to secure protective papers from the Wallenberg legation at the Swedish embassy. These papers helped him survive the Holocaust. My father also managed to obtain protective papers for his mother, but sadly, my grandfather, Jenő, was rounded up, deported, and murdered en route to Bergen-Belsen extermination camp before my father could obtain papers for him. After the liberation of Europe, tragically, my dad discovered that with the exception of a very few lucky souls, several dozen of his relatives were murdered in Auschwitz. These included his beloved 80-year-old grandmother, aunts, uncles, and numerous infant cousins. These losses left him with wounds that endured to the very end of his life. Following the war, my dad once again applied to the Joseph Nader Technical University of Budapest. This time, he was accepted. On account of losing his father during the Holocaust, my dad had become the sole breadwinner for his family at the age of 22. My dad supported his immediate family by tending the family insurance business into the late evenings while he attended university on a full-time basis during the day. Talk about determination. During the summer of 1948, my dad volunteered to be the director of a Jewish summer camp. Most of the campers were Holocaust survivor orphans. It was at this camp where he met his best friend and future business partner, my mother, Judith Kopstein. Their first engineering collaboration was their work together on my dad's final thesis for his engineering degree. While my dad was a brilliant engineer, drafting was not his strong suit. Anyone who remembers his handwriting can attest to this fact. My mom, who did have a knack for drawing, volunteered to help him with the final drawings for the project. This was the beginning of a lifetime partnership that spanned both their private and professional lives. My mother graduated as a structural engineer in 1954. My father received his degree in civil engineering from the József Nader Technical University of Budapest, Hungary in 1949. He worked as a structural design engineer and later as a department head at the Industrial Building Design Institute of Budapest. He received several awards for his outstanding work there. In 1953, during Hungary's darkest Stalinist days, my parents defied the communist regime and were secretly married by a rabbi in a synagogue. They were warned at their workplace that if they dared to be married by a rabbi or in a synagogue, that the two of them would be separated, one sent to one end of the country, the other sent to the other. But they felt so very strongly about being married Jewish that they took the chance. That's the kind of people they were. My parents escaped from Hungary after the failed Hungarian Revolution in 1956. They were both very ambitious and did not wait around in a refugee camp for a country to accept them. Rather, they looked for and secured jobs in Austria as civil engineers. My parents designed the foundation of the first high-rise building in Vienna. While life was good in the spectacular Tyrolean Alps, where they got jobs, my parents decided that the Iron Curtain was much, much too close for comfort. They wished to start a new life in a democratic, English-speaking country. They applied to immigrate to Canada and were accepted as refugees in 1957. In August 1957, my parents arrived in Montreal with 2 backpacks and a grand total of $70 between them. That's all they had. Talk about a hard start. My dad's backpack, which they still have in their basement as a souvenir of their journey to Canada, contained the following: his slide rule, 1 change of underwear, his prayer book, and his tallis and tefillin given to him by his father on the occasion of his bar mitzvah. My father became a Canadian citizen in 1963, proudly adopting Canada as his chosen country. After a short stint in Montreal, my dad landed a job as a design engineer with Winnipeg Hydro. So, with their few belongings, my parents set off on the next leg of their adventure for a temporary stay in the Wild West in Winnipeg. They fell in love with the tranquility of the city, the friendliness of the locals, and the good quality of life here. Well, they never left. In 1959, my father established Weismann and Associates Consulting Engineers in partnership with my mother. They moonlighted in the evenings after their day jobs in order to get the business on a firm footing. I recall that as a child, there was always a second shift of workers coming to the home office to work on urgent projects. The business was a very vibrant part of the whole family's life. Both Paul and I worked on and off for Weismann and Associates from a very, very young age. Whether it was attending at a construction site to take measurements, hold the tape measure while my dad walked out and measured something, delivering plans, photocopying specifications, or proofreading. This was truly a family business. In 1965, my father left Hydro to devote all his time to their consulting practice. Together, over the course of the next 48 years, my parents proceeded to design a large variety of building structures, ranging from schools, banks, community centers, nursing homes, nursing stations in the far north, airplane hangars, sports arenas, industrial buildings, apartment blocks, churches, and synagogues. They provided consulting engineering services for lawyers and investors and were involved in a wide range of specialized engineering works over the 48 years of their varied consulting practice. My dad was invited several times to give lectures on safe construction practices to members of the construction industry. He was commissioned to write a handbook for building wood grain elevators. My father was an active member of the Association of Professional Engineers and Geologists of Manitoba for 49 years. He served on the Advocacy and Member Services Committee and on the Consulting Engineers Committee for 34 years. For a number of years, he chaired the Consulting Engineers Committee and represented Manitoba at the National Forum in Ottawa. In 2000, my father received his Golden Engineering degree from the Technical University of Budapest for his 50 years of outstanding engineering work. The Association of Professional Engineers and Geologists of Manitoba granted my father an honorary life membership in 2006. In 2009, my father became a Fellow of Engineers Canada. He was greatly honored to have been recognized by his peers for his service to the engineering profession. My father was truly a family man. Despite the financial burden it would pose, my dad insisted that his mother, in-laws, and grandmother-in-law immigrate to Canada quite early in their tenure here, so, in the early 60s to mid-60s, in order that the family be reunited. My father took great pleasure in the accomplishments of his children and grandchildren. There was a special place in his heart for Adrian. Adrian affectionately referred to my father as Papa. My dad was a very charitable man, having never forgotten the hard start he had as a former refugee himself. He was always willing to assist newcomer engineers and technicians to settle into practicing their profession, and he often helped them find work. My dad was a believer in educating future generations about the devastating effects of the Holocaust and what had led up to the Holocaust. He gave his time generously for decades to high schools and universities lecturing on the Holocaust. He fervently hoped that by teaching future generations about the historical background of the Holocaust, that hatred leading to such cataclysm could be avoided in the future. After 42 years of a busy engineering practice, my parents retired in 2007. They spent many winters enjoying the beauty and climate of Hawaii. My father was a lover of hard work. He truly enjoyed being an engineer, and it defined him. He loved to travel, he loved to swim, and he loved to take care of the small forest that he and my mother planted in their yard. And I see Polly smiling because right next door. He was an avid reader and fan of classical music and opera. An avowed chocoholic, there was no type of chocolate that he could not be tempted with. Despite many health challenges in his later years, my dad was truly the eternal optimist, seeing the positive side of every situation. His strong will to live helped him to survive a serious heart attack, quintuple bypass surgery, and a debilitating stroke, after which he learned to speak and eat again. We joyously celebrated my dad's 88th birthday a few short weeks ago. He still had so much planned for the future. Sadly, my father succumbed to congestive heart failure on October 27th, after fighting this condition for several months. He will be greatly missed. His determination, his steadfast focus on the positive, and his spirit will continue to be an inspiration to all that knew him. Thank you.
I can't remember when our two families connected. All I know, it was a long time ago. But we did connect, and over the years benefited in many, many ways. At one point, when we went on sabbatical, the Weismanns took care of our house. My next-door neighbor didn't think that I was much of a householder, commented to me that couple did a better job taking care of your house than you do, which I'm sure, by the way, was true. Again, I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but in the early 70s, I convinced the University of Manitoba that we ought to give a course on the Holocaust. The course was divided into two parts, what you might call the documentary history of the Holocaust, which was the first semester. But I thought it was very important, in fact, more important, for the students to hear the personal stories, the autobiographies of survivors. And somehow I had the good fortune, or I was smart enough to invite Erwin and Judy. I was always struck as they came back year after year. They told the same story in very different ways. But when you got both of them, you got a completeness that you wouldn't have had if you only heard one of them. And then, for a short while, I had the honor of occupying this pulpit. In those days, things were a lot higher up. We had a class in basic Judaism, many of whose students were preparing to become Jews. They were going to become Jews by choice. And I felt they needed parents, people for whom Judaism was part and parcel of their fabric, their reality. And I approached them and I said, would you guys be the mama and the papa, the parents for this class? And they didn't skip a beat. They said, of course, we'll do that. We still have connections from that class. And then something that will always remain in my memory, I don't know if you guys know this, but I had a discussion once with Erwin about preparing for Yom Kippur. And there's a ceremony called kaparot. I won't go into it. It comes the morning before Yom Kippur. And although I had read about it and heard about it, I never had whatever it took to get up that early in the morning and do it. But he did. And a couple of days in advance on my my recording machine, whatever we called it in those days, was that typical voice that Erwin had. And he said something to the effect that the morning of Yom Kippur, early in the morning, we are going to reenact the ancient Jewish ritual of Kaporos. Would you like to join me? I didn't go, quite honestly. I just didn't have what it took to get up so early in the morning. But I understood something about how deep his connections to the Jewish tradition. There is a tradition among East European Jews to name our children after the deceased. In this case, it was Yosef Shalom ben Yaakov Gittel. And there's a rabbi's tradition that you sometimes structure the eulogy around the name of the person. Understand that naming someone after this deceased is, of course, intended to create continuity, but it's also meant as a way of somehow capturing the essence of what this person will be. I think Erwin would have enjoyed the remarks I'm about to make, which kind of brings him together with the name Yosef of Joseph. Like the biblical Joseph or Yosef, Erwin was a person who dreamed many dreams, as Anne said. And of course, as indicated, even at the end of his days, he still had many plans and many dreams. He had this amazing ability to see the world as a place full of possibilities. And that's an amazing gift. When his body began to fail and his world became kind of constricted to the hospital room, he was able to take flight and to still connect with the possibilities of life. I have no doubt that his ability to dream and to transcend the moment contributed to his survival during the war and to his success. The Midrash, the ancient rabbinic interpretations, insists that although Joseph rose to the heights of political power in Egypt, he remained faithful to his Jewish tradition. They paint the picture of Joseph, now second in command of Egypt, coming to visit his aged father, Yaakov, and with Yosef comes his two children. And the Midrash says that when old Yaakov looked at these two grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, he knew immediately that they had a strong Jewish identity. That somehow Joseph had instilled that in these two young people. And so, when these fine folks became parents, they saw to it that their children, Anne and Paul, would receive a better than average Jewish education. In those times that Erwin told his story to the university students, there was a story that many of you probably heard from him, but still vibrates in my head. After the Russians had taken over Budapest and began to ferret out who were the good guys and who were the bad guys, which was a tough thing to encounter, Erwin happened to be on the street, and a Russian soldier came along with a gun and pointed to him to get into a truck. At that moment, he realized he might be headed for Siberia or worse. And somehow, instinctively, he cried out, Shema Yisroel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I don't know where that came from, except deep, deep inside his Joseph soul. And somehow, the soldier let him alone, and he continued into the path of life. It struck me, and it still does, that on Yom Kippur, we read the story of Jonah. Early on in the story, Jonah is at sea, and there's a great storm. And all the men on the ship, all the sailors, go down deep into the ship. And they're trying to figure out what's going on here. And they ask each person who's sitting around, what's your ethnic identity? Where do you come from? And Jonah says, Ivri Anochi. I'm a Hebrew. I'm a Jew. And that story and other things about this Yosef always made that very clear. Ivri Anochi. I'm a Jew. It didn't mean narrowness of mind or any kind of xenophobia. It was something deeply, deeply rooted in him. Toward the end of Yaakov's life, the biblical Yaakov, Joseph is reunited with his family. The family fears that somehow the biblical Joseph will wreak revenge on his brothers and deny his father. But the biblical Joseph, like our Yosef, like Erwin, is dedicated to the family in ways in which Anne so beautifully told us about earlier. Toward the end of the book of Genesis, actually the very closing of the book of Genesis, we hear of Joseph's desire to be gathered to his fathers, to his ancestors, and to be returned to Eretz Yisrael, to be buried in what we today call Keva Yisrael, to have a proper Jewish burial. Let's remember that it was Hitler's intent that none of us would have this. It was the intent of the people of the Arrow Cross and the others that, like his father, this Joseph would be disposed of and not buried. And yet, despite our sadness today, this is, after all, a moment of victory. Our Yosef, like his biblical predecessor, is being honored here in a synagogue. He's going to be properly buried. His children will recite Kaddish. His grandchildren will remember him. So this is, despite the sadness, I think, a moment of victory. The Talmud has an interesting teaching that over the years has become very important to me. I'm not a Winnipegger by birth. I'm a New Yorker, as you can probably tell from my English. One of the wonderful things about living in Winnipeg is my long association with Holocaust survivors of all varieties. And as these people became my friends and my instructors and my teachers and my mentors, the Weizmanns, chief among them, I realized that the Talmud has a rule. It says, Shaliach oseh shaliach. An agent can deputize another agent to carry out a mission. It was his mission to tell the story. It was his passion, maybe his compulsion to try to understand why people would behave and do the things they did. But whatever it was, he was a shaliach. He became the voice of his father and the voice of others who could not speak for themselves. I think all of us who survive, in this case myself, feel that his influence calls upon us to become shaliach, to tell the story, and to make sure that the story will be told in coming generations in a live and powerful way, as he told it in a live and powerful way. I personally will remember him for his bravery, his nobility, his tenacity, and maybe above all else, his dreams. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life, and let us say, Amen. Kfura, burial, takes place at the Shaarey Zedek Cemetery directly after we finish here. The meal of condolence takes place at the family home. The family will be sitting Shiva through the week Have you guys set times for people to come? What are the times? I forgot to ask. Between 2 and 4. 7:30 to 9:30. That's every day from 2 to 4, from 7:30 to 9:30. The minyanim will be here at the Shaarey Zedek. The family declines gifts, flowers and things like that in favor of charity. Would you please rise as the cantor recites the El Molei Rachamim.
El Molei Rachamim Shochem B'meroimim Hametzem Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Kedoshim Uteorim Kezoyar Araki Amazirim Edeni Shemat Edeni Shemat Yosef Shalom Ben Yaakov Gital She'alach le'olamo Bahabu Shenu Mitpalelim Ve'adat Skarat Nishemato Began Heitein Began Edentein Menuchato Lachem Balerachamim Astireu Veseder Kenaf Avleolamim Utzeror Bitrarachayim HaChaim Et Nishemato Adonai Unachalato Veyanuach Veshalom Al Mishkafo Venomar Amen.
Would you please remain standing as the mourners and the pallbearers leave the sanctuary? We'll gather in the lobby to escort the casket out of the synagogue on its way to the Shaarey Zedek Cemetery. This concludes the first part of our process. Thank you.